Hello. All right. Well, let's see. I was going to play Jeopardy if I had company, but since I don't have company, I think we'll just do some plain old clicker questions. So let's go ahead and bring it up. Do a screen share. All right. All right. So the Unit 10 clicker questions. Let's get started with this. All righty. Okay, so here we go from section 10.1. Which of the following is not an example of extracellular fluid? So we're looking for fluid outside the cells. Which one? Well, cytoplasm is inside the cell, so most likely it's going to be cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is intracellular fluid. All right. Which of the following individuals have the highest percentage of water in their body mass composition? Who is the most water? Well, this was at the very beginning of the lecture, and hopefully you remember that it's going to be the infant. So the infant doesn't have a lot of bone density. Remember, they're still dealing with a hyaline cartilage skeletal system that's starting to fill in with bone. They don't have a ton of fat. I know they look like it, but they don't have a ton of fat. So yeah, it's going to be the infants. See, the area of the brain that plays a major role in water and electrolyte balance is hopefully the one you remember is deeply involved in homeostasis, which would be our buddy, the hypothalamus. All right. This force is exerted against the wall of something that's holding a fluid and causes the movement of fluid from one area to another. And we talked about this extensively when we were looking at capillaries. And hopefully you remember it was hydrostatic pressure. So fluids will always put a pressure against the wall of whatever they're contained in. And when we're talking about the fluid inside of a capillary, it would be the capillary hydrostatic pressure. The main intracellular electrolyte is, so which electrolyte is inside of the cell? That's a good question, isn't it? Well, it's probably not going to be sodium. And if it's not sodium, it's probably not going to be chloride either, because they have a tendency to run around the universe together. So we're looking at either potassium or calcium. And I'm going to remind you about some pumps that are real important. So it would be the sodium potassium pumps. So about 98% of the body's potassium is going to be housed inside of cells. Yeah. Okay. A decrease in the osmolarity, which is the solute concentration of extracellular fluid, would cause water to do what? So we've lost particles, basically. So what's water going to do? Is it going to move into a cell? Is it going to move into the interstitial space outside the cell? Is it going to move into the blood? Is it going to move into lymph? Where's it going to go? Good question, isn't it? Well, chances are it's going to move into the cells. So when we have fewer particles outside the cell, more particles inside the cell per volume of water, then water is going to have a tendency to go inside of the cell. Now, that's one way to think it through. The other thing is that if we look at where interstitial fluid is, blood and lymph, those are all extracellular fluids. So chances that water is going to move into one extracellular fluid as opposed to another, I mean, it's possible. I mean, it can go one place first before it ends up in another. That's true. But the way that another approach to that would be to say, well, which one of these is not like the other? Well, movement into the cell. So let me read the question. A decrease in osmolarity, extracellular osmolarity. Well, basically that means particles went down. There's more particles now inside the cell, so water's going to go inside the cell. All right. Which solute plays the biggest role in water reabsorption? Is it going to be your bicarbonate ions, your potassium ions, your calcium ions, or your sodium ions? And hopefully you are remembering that it's going to be sodium. It's like Mother Nature has endowed sodium ions with all this special currency. You know, they get to move around, and in exchange, water tags along, but then so do things like glucose and different ions. So it's really remarkable how much value sodium has in the body as far as moving things around, including water. Which of the following is a stimulus for the thirst center in the brain? Is it salivation? Is it decreased plasma volume? Is it decreased solutes in our extracellular fluid? Is it the sensation of thirst? So which is going to stimulate thirst in the brain? Well, if we think about why we would want to do that, it probably has something to do with a decrease in our overall volume of fluid. So if we think about the mechanisms that are involved in the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, I'm going to go there. Even though it doesn't trigger thirst, we talk about thirst in regards to that, because what happens is we've experienced a drop in our blood volume, which means we've experienced a drop in our blood pressure. And we stimulate aldosterone release ultimately, and that's going to pull fluid out of filtrate and get it to go back into the bloodstream in efforts to increase blood volume. And then the other thing we do is we're going to trigger the release of antidiuretic hormone, again, to pull more fluid out of filtrate. And then we're going to stimulate the thirst centers in the hypothalamus to go make us go drink something. So all of that comes about as a result of decrease in blood plasma. And we've talked about this in this particular unit, and then in I want to say also in the kidney unit. All right, USLO 10.3. Ions are exchanged to maintain balance in the body. Which of the following is not an exchange that occurs in the body? So we have sodium ions and hydrogen ions. We have chloride ions and bicarbonate ions. We have sodium ions and potassium ions. We have calcium ions, and we have phosphate ions. Well, we know that we have sodium potassium pumps, and that they're going to be used as an exchange. And in the last lecture in this unit, we talked about how when the kidneys detect that there is an increase in pH, when our pH drops and we become more acidic, that it will selectively move bicarbonate ions into the interstitial space that can be picked up by the bloodstream, as opposed to chloride ions, which are normally going to follow sodium. So we know that chloride and bicarbonate is an exchange that happens. So then that leaves us with sodium ions and hydrogen ions, or calcium ions and phosphate ions. So why would it be calcium ions and phosphate ions and not sodium ions and hydrogen ions? Well, sodium ions have a single positive charge, as do hydrogen ions. And oftentimes that is a symporter mechanism that is utilized, because we want to maintain charge across the cell membrane. And so we can do that with these two positively charged elements, these two positively charged ions being exchanged. We won't exchange a positively charged ion for a negatively charged ion. And in fact, very much like how sodium and chloride run around the universe together, calcium and phosphate run around the universe together. So wherever we find one, we're going to find the other one. So that's why we don't have that sort of exchange happening. That would be like saying we're exchanging sodium for chloride. It doesn't happen. One's going to typically follow the other. All right, so which of the following is not a function of chloride? It balances cations in the blood. Yeah, it maintains the body's acid-base balance. Doesn't really maintain it. It can be sacrificed in order to maintain. It contributes to osmotic pressure. Yeah, it's a particle. And it plays an important role in maintaining hydration. Yeah, So, excuse me, our answer for this is going to be that it doesn't really play a role in maintaining the acid-base balance. It's actually sacrificed in order to maintain acid-base balance. We're going to go with that. All right. Oh, already got the answer exposed. The largest amount of water comes into the body by way of liquids. It's what we drink. All right, that was disappointing. Sorry about that. All right, the largest amount of water leaves the body by what mechanism? And if you remember that image that I showed you, I made the statement that about as much as we drink is about as much as we urinate. Yeah. All right, insensible water loss. Is water lost via, is it through skin evaporation and through breathing out? Is it urine? Is it excessive sweating? Is it vomiting and diarrhea? Well, I talked about insensible water loss when I said they put a mirror underneath the nose to see if you're still breathing. And so insensible water loss is going to be lost through evaporation from the skin as well as through the air, moisture in the air as you breathe out. All right, which of the following is not true of antidiuretic hormone? So which of these is not true? Let's see, it controls the amount of water absorbed from the collecting ducts. That sounds good. It is released when the hypothalamic osmoreceptors detect an increase in blood plasma concentration. It causes arterioles to dilate. And it is released from the posterior pituitary. Well, we know it's released from the posterior pituitary. Question is, does it make the arterioles dilate? Right? And it doesn't. It does not. But it does act on the collecting ducts, and it is released because of the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus detecting an increase in osmolality, or increase in osmolality. We've got a greater concentration of solutes. We need to kind of water things down. All right, 10.4. Which of the following is not true of aldosterone? So all of these but one are true. All are true but one. It increases the reabsorption of sodium. Sounds good. It increases the excretion of potassium. It works largely on the distal convoluted tubule. That's what we were taught. And a trigger for its release is increase in blood pressure. Well, let's think about that. So we're releasing aldosterone in order to pull more fluid into the bloodstream, because we know that an increase in blood volume leads to an increase in blood pressure. So probably the trigger for the release of aldosterone is not an increase in blood pressure, but in fact a decrease in blood pressure. So the answer would be D. That is not true. All the other ones are. All right, if blood potassium level increases, what is the body's response? What's the body going to do when it says, oh dear, I've got too much potassium? Are the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus going to figure it out and release antidiuretic hormone? Is the adrenal cortex going to figure it out and increase blood plasma potassium, that the blood potassium levels have increased and therefore it's going to release aldosterone? Is the hypothalamus going to figure that we've got increased potassium and release aldosterone? Is the kidney going to detect the increased blood potassium and release it into filtrate? So what are our options here? Well, this is an unusual ion because the adrenal cortex can detect the increase in the potassium and trigger the release of aldosterone, because we know aldosterone runs on sodium-potassium pumps. It's going to move sodium back into the bloodstream while pulling potassium out of the bloodstream. And if we have too much, that's exactly what we want to do. Pull it out of the bloodstream, get it into filtrate, and eliminate it. So what is a trigger for the creation of angiotensin II? Why are we making it? Is it because we have an increase in blood calcium? Is it because we have increased stretch on the atria of the heart? Is it because we have increased blood potassium levels? Or is it because we have decreased sodium chloride in our filtrate as it's going from the ascending limb of the nephron loop into the distal convoluted tubule? And it's actually a decrease in the sodium chloride concentration in the filtrate. That's a trigger for the release of renin, which creates angiotensin, which ultimately will release aldosterone. What hormone triggers the uptake of calcium in the kidneys? Really? Well, there is one. So when we're asking the kidneys to take up calcium and put it back in the bloodstream, it's because our blood calcium levels are low. And the hormone that is released in response to low blood calcium levels is going to be PTH. That's right. All right. How does a protein act like a buffer? Well, let's see. Our choices are its carboxylic acid end can donate a hydrogen. Well, most acids can donate a hydrogen, so there's a possibility that that's true. Its amine end can accept a hydrogen. Seems like we talked about that. So maybe A and B, or maybe protein cannot act like a buffer. What are you thinking? Oops, don't want to do that. Excellent, you got out of the wrong thing. Well, it's actually C. The carboxylic acid end can donate a hydrogen ion, and the amine can actually accept one. So, and a buffer is basically a solution that has the ability to either donate hydrogen ions or accept them, depending upon what the environment is. So how does hemoglobin act like a buffer in red blood cells? And how does it contribute to oxygen exchange? So how does hemoglobin act like a buffer in red blood cells? So how does hemoglobin acting like a buffer in red blood cells contribute to oxygen exchange? Well, we know that hemoglobin is a protein, and so it's going to be sensitive to those changes in pH in the environment, meaning that if there's excessive amounts of hydrogen ions, it's going to take on a hydrogen ion, and it's going to release the oxygen. And if there's a low amount of hydrogen ions, it will release a hydrogen ion, and which will allow for oxygen to come in and occupy a spot on the hemoglobin bus. So let's read what our options are. In highly acidic environments, it's going to release oxygen and preferentially bind to hydrogen ions. I think I just said that. Let's read what our other options are. In alkaline environments, it's going to bind to carbon dioxide. No. In highly acidic environments, hemoglobin reacts with water to make carbonic acid. No. In alkaline environments, hemoglobin releases water and oxygen. No. So A is the answer. In highly acidic environments, hemoglobin is going to release oxygen in order to preferentially bind with the hydrogen ions, because it's going to act like a buffer. Okay. The phosphate buffering system behaves almost identically to the carbonate buffering system. Which of the following is true about the phosphate buffering system? Let's see, it's used in respiratory acidosis. It's a secondary buffering system in the blood. It is the buffering system used to buffer urine. It is a buffering system used by cells. Well, there's actually two correct answers in here. And I did say that it is a buffering system used in urine, but D is also true. Probably should have, yeah, because remember we have a lot of phosphate inside of cells because we're always cleaving off phosphates when we're utilizing ATP, so they're always around, and so we can use them as a buffer while they're not doing anything else. So actually this answer has two correct answers. It is used as a buffering system in urine, and it's also used as a buffering system inside of cells. Found a flaw. All right. A condition of chronic alkalosis can be due to, so we're chronically high in our pH. Is it because we have reduced ACTH secretion coming from the anterior pituitary? Is it because we have Cushing's disease and something weird's happening with our aldosterone? Is it because we have an increase in thyroxine production? Or is it because we have hyposecretion of ADH? See what the answer is. So Cushing's disease. Cushing's disease can lead us down the path of alkalosis, making us a little bit too alkaline. So, all right. Conditions such as pneumonia, emphysema, and congestive heart failure can lead to what's happening here. Well, all of these basically mean that we're not getting good lung excursion, and so we might end up having respiratory acidosis. Extreme emotional upset, fear, fever, infections can lead to, well, what happens when you get really upset or really scared? Well, you end up breathing really fast, and that can lead to respiratory alkalosis. The reason why hyperkalemia, elevated levels of potassium, is dangerous is because excessive potassium causes neurons to reduce their responsiveness to stimuli. Increased potassium makes it hard for cardiac muscle to repolarize, which can stop the heart from beating. Yeah, that's an important thing. Excessive potassium can overhydrate the cells. Increased potassium can lead to edema. And the answer is increased potassium can make it harder for cardiac muscle to repolarize, which can stop the heart from beating. Chronic and severe liver disease can lead to a decrease in the production of plasma proteins, where most of them come from. What can result when there are insufficient plasma proteins in the blood? Well, what's the role of plasma proteins? What have we learned? Well, they're a transport mechanism, and they're also responsible for creating osmotic pressure. So if we don't have enough plasma proteins, we can actually end up with edema. Too much fluid being spilled out in the capillary beds. And with that, my friends, we are done. All right, let's call it good. It's been about an hour, no, 30 minutes. And I will get this posted, and I'll see you guys next week.